Chapter 52 to 53. Omake 7, FGO number 7. Barghest was irritated. Actually no, Barghest wasn't irritated, Fairy Knight Gawain was. Master told her that she was exaggerating about it, that maybe she should be a bit more open-minded at the possibility that not all of her versions were that interested in being knights, but that wasn't the issue. Far from it. When Baobin Sith was taken by the very individuals her queen told her to spy on, she thought that she had it in her to endure the general kindness of these individuals. That since she had no clear connection to them, it would have been her sole duty to deal with them all at once, but that proved to be a mistaken view. Just like with the heiress to Morgan's throne, even the tall and towering blonde found herself stunned stiff when she spotted a large hound happily walking together with the pretty-looking queen to the unusual king. Tail wagging, tongue out as the beast breathed excitedly and shivering in pure eagerness, while the giggles from the young woman beside it plus the tender scratching around its neck further enabled it to behave submissively. It made the knight angry. It made the knight aggravated. She couldn't exactly explain what really had her this miffed at the sight. Not without going into the details of that scene. That hound wasn't Lobo. The beast had a particular fur and scent Barghest had learned to know about but also despise due to her basic instinct. No, the blonde could recognize this other scent, and the worst part of it was that it wasn't too different from hers. Where the large mutt smelled of natural Barghest, hers was more metallic and artificial. And that's where the jealousy sparked, but not how it grew worse the more she was around that scene. Even looking at it from afar did little to soothe her inner irritation. The beast that was happily part of that family was less than her. She didn't look to have the power of a knight, only the original might that the human histories Barghest owned. Such an inferior version of herself, and yet happier. The content look wasn't deceptive, the mutt was glad to have what she got, albeit it wasn't something Fairy Knight Gawain would consider as something pleasant. Her musing eventually ceased as she spotted a figure that gained her attention. King Joseph was currently alone, seemingly enjoying a break from others and presenting an opportunity. For what? The knight wanted to inquire about the queen's very questions, while the quieter side of her, now louder than before, wanted something else. Something immediate, something she knew the other king could answer promptly if asked. She approached, her struggles far from settling as she finally got close enough and gained his attention due to her proximity. He blinked, offering a fascinated look. "Good morning, Fairy Knight Gawain. Is there something I can help you with?" "Perhaps," the blonde replied curtly. "I'm surprised that you have a contract with a fairy beast." "Oh, you mean Barghest? What about her?" He knew her name? That was shocking in a way, but not completely. It could be that her appearance had been recorded by humans and that had been a renowned being. "How did you get a contract that bound her to you? What did you offer her to submit her will to you?" He blinked and showed the knight confusion. "You mean if I have offered anything to gain her services?" "That's not exactly how it went," the monarch argued, leaving the knight frowning. "If I remember correctly, we found Barghest as she had been summoned by a cult trying to attack my kingdom by binding her to them. They were actually unprepared for that occasion as Barghest didn't accept their demands, and that ended up with a fight that left her wounded." "And?" The blonde pressed, her intrigue doubled at that unexpected backstory behind such a bond. "And I found her after looking over the massacre she left behind. I thought that what we would have found was a dangerous beast, but when I looked at her growling and yet stationary form, I couldn't help but notice that she was furious not because we were here, but because she saw us as threats due to her injury," the human continued the story. "So I calmly sheathed my sword and walked up to the injury with the intention of healing it. She wasn't exactly trusting at that point, but she dropped all that anger when she got her wound fixed. She even allowed me to rub her belly. It was instinctual, with Barghest reaching for her covered stomach and wondering if that was even really good. A gesture that wasn't missed by the king as he looked thoughtful for a moment before he advanced an accurate notion of the situation. "You are her, aren't you?" The guest left her stiff once more, her eyes wide open and her head bobbing up and down in a nod. "Yes." Joseph sighed. "I suppose it's a bit frustrating. It's a version of you and it's a different look on how things could have been done." "How do you dash?" "Baobin Sith is like that too. She is still nervous at times, but I believe she enjoys being treated as part of the family and having a twin sister." "And what does leave me to do?" The fairy knight remarked dryly. "I'm a knight and a loyal supporter of Queen Morgan." Despite the stern reminder, the human smiled. "Are you just that, Barghest?" She frowned. "What? Are you just a knight, Barghest?" "Cooking with the twins isn't much knightly, same for spending time playing with the children's servants," Joseph pointed out. "I would say that you are a knight, but it would be foolish to say you're just that. You are a bit more than that. You're a person, an individual, someone that has hobbies, dreams and expectations, but also flaws, things to hate and activities to detest. And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? You're not bound to be a single-dimensional being, but be an outright sentient being," the king replied earnestly. "And that should be the priority now. To explore what you previously couldn't because it would help you in the long run." "Help? How? Would it make me stronger?" She inquired, her interest just increasing the more he spoke. I would say no since you're already at your strongest, but I believe that's not what you really think of this. Wouldn't you say that you lack some inner balance? Balance? Why did she stutter? This wasn't the first time she was told this, but why the way he said it made her so upset with herself. You're trying to focus more on the gift you got, the power you received, but in doing so you suppress part of your own mindset and that leaves you dissatisfied. After all, such a brilliant knight needs to fight their own instincts rather than suppress them. What would be the difference between a knight and its sword at that point? And how should I do this? Finding relaxation would be a first step. To calm down and let peace drive you to resolution, Joseph answered readily, patting his lap as he was sitting by one of the chairs, offering him the means to offer her a lap pillow. And why did she do this? She was lowering to the lap, her chest pressing onto his legs, with her arms being used as support as she knelt down and got comfortable out of instinct. His hands moved and she felt her hair ruffled before he went to the attack. The scratching, the caressing, her eyes fluttered half-closed as she felt pure bliss strike her very core in a state of peace. Why does this feel so good? It shouldn't be. She wasn't a mindless beast, a dog, a mutt. And yet the touch had her at ease. It was pleasant, but not as raw and intense as her many conquests as a knight. No, it was lighter and yet so refreshing. She hummed, nuzzling against the palm as it began to leave her utterly sleepy. How long has she kept this frustration in her, and why didn't she try to let go of it before? Why this felt right. She yawned, her need to find a time to rest now hitting her the strongest, depriving her of her strengths as she softly started to snore on the human's lap, much to his amusement, his strokes over her head never ceasing for a moment as the blonde happily found her own peace one step at the time. After all, she was Fairy Knight Gawain and Barghest, both the same being and never one of these two without the other. Oh make end. It's been 2 big months since that meeting with Rhea and Guinevere, and let's just say that a lot has happened in that amount of time. A lot. Starting from introducing Barghest to Londinium. People weren't exactly fine with a large hound that looked ready to pounce and kill the first target on sight, but actions spoke better than words, so I allowed a few kids to approach the beast and test its tame degree. The large dog wasn't truly convinced at first too, baring her teeth before the bunch of children that were picked for the occasion. Brave boys and girls that were more into trying out how fluffy the dog was. What ensued was Barghest making it a personal mission to actually be subjected to head pats, chin scratching and even some belly rubbing when she felt the itch to get treated to some pseudo-cuddling. Most of the time she would ask either me, Maya or even Liana once she got around the size of the big fluffy doggo. The redhead proved to be the best prepared for it, going as far as saying that Barghest liked her the most. A tiny white lie considering that the large fairy dog preferred to rest her head on Maya's lap whenever tired. I would get that treatment too, but it would happen less than it would with my wife. Plus, I guess that very notion came from the fact that my beloved wife's pregnancy was becoming more visible, with her belly growing as she got through the last months of this process. Her moods were moderately weird, nothing too crazy but definitely gaining a few frowns from me and others due to her interesting food choice. Her mood swings were bearable, and the worst that happened through this phase was her necessity to be constantly around me and demanding cuddles. It was adorable, but it also left us both in awkward circumstances when she got a stronger mood out of the proximity. And I could tell that I was doing things to people like Scathack and Morgan. The former was reasonable as she had pressed the issue of going for a new deal with us regarding our relationship, but Maya had been the one to set her foot down on the matter. I would have expected the woman to be immensely angered by this very development, but for some odd reasons she wasn't. No, what I could pick up during training or even during some casual talking with the former warrior queen was that she was waiting for something. It was as if there had been a conversation that I wasn't aware about and something that, once brought up to Maya, would only get her to smile giddily and silly. Can't tell. Girls talk. What the heck? I would press this for a while and yet gained no genuine response from it. Actually, that seemed to further enable Maya to be incredibly teasing in this regard, poking fun at my paranoia and calling me a dummy for thinking it was something that awkward. And the way she put it didn't exactly put any worry to rest. Nonetheless, this was perhaps less worrisome than what happened with Morgan. One would think that someone as restrained as the witch would be less conscious of what is going on with the world, but when I first went to visit her and check on her, she asked to have a private talk with me and... You took my sister's purity. The accusation felt less than a random assault and more of an affirmation. Her voice exuded with certainty that left me stumped on how she got to that point. What? Feigning ignorance will not spare you from the fact I know that's the case. Odd how she lost that detail of her being when you were visiting her and her little pet, the blonde rebuked strongly, odd anger emerging from her gaze. What if that was the case? It is the case, Joseph. I have left some elements that would warn me of this instance, nothing deadly obviously but meant to tell me of this kind of development once those happen, the woman replied, and then assured as she spotted the annoyed look on my face at the mention she had something to monitor Rhea. Still, I guess a man can't help himself in keeping just friends with my sister. I wasn't the one offering dash. That's not the issue here, you buffoon. she yelled, almost jumping at me from her chair and getting me to hold my sword's handle. She spotted that, pausing and then backing off from the confrontation. The issue here is that now you have started a dangerous game that could either crack your kingdoms or worse. What if that foolish pet of hers noticed what happened? What about your wife? I opened my mouth to that, but as she finished saying her side of the trouble, I couldn't help but hesitate. Said hesitation was quickly noticed by Morgan, and the woman frowned at me harder due to it. You told either of them, didn't you? I did not, I replied. But they might be aware of this for other reasons. I didn't need to go deeper in this matter, with the witch giving me a long look and groaning. You four. Aren't you and your wife Christians? Wouldn't that be against your religion? Technically speaking, I don't need technicalities. How can you just roll with it? It's childish, absurd. Heck, you are going to risk more than losing your crown with this matter. Not truly. Morgan's spiel stopped, then her gaze moved at me once more as she pressed me on the topic, confused by my response. What do you mean? This act wasn't against any religious rules. But it will still cause a massive ruckus due to Ria's real gender and role within society. 2 kings sharing a bed with their wives? Very awkward to fully explain. That's the least, the woman remarked dryly. But that's not the point you're lamenting about, isn't it? I rebuked flatly, growing annoyed by her vehemence at this point. After all, your issue with me is tied to the fact it was your sister who got in bed with me. No. You are annoyed that it wasn't you somehow. That I should have picked you instead of her. That's not what I was. Then what do you want out of this, Morgan? I interrupted again, arms crossed near my chair as I gave her a strong glance. I could tell something about this nod really deep in her mind. Why are you so incensed about it? What I got through that visit was silence. She stared back at me, her face slightly pinker than before, either due to anger or embarrassment, and tears slowly forming at the edges of her eyes. I wasn't sure what was going on inside her head, but I gave her plenty of time by just leaving after 10 minutes without an answer. Reluctance had flashed within her expression, but the blonde refused to bring up that argument beyond that point. Instead, I noticed a general effort in ensuing visits where she would try to get close to me, to slowly wrap her fingers around my hand, to sit nearer to me than in previous times. I could see it all, but I refused to either be too loud in that rejection or even ignore it. She could pick the signs herself, and I could see it on the upset growing during these times. She knew what would set her free, but decided to be stubborn and prideful, picking the old ways as her favored course of action. Too bad for her. I thought that would have been the end of it, but that didn't seem to be the case. Lucy had much to think about as she remained in Londinium. I just couldn't help but notice the sudden lack of her outbursts or aggressive efforts of persuasion. No more as touchy, no more as loud, she behaved differently, keeping her brazen behavior despite this strange development, but I was soon able to identify the cause of it all. When Maya was around, Lucy tended to behave quietly and meekly. Not to the point of being confused as a shy girl, but to the point where I could tell she was trying to leave the room unnoticed. An effort denied by Maya's unusual interest to drag the reluctant redhead in conversations whenever she was around. Likewise, a similar behavior unfolded when Scat-Hack was nearby, with the redhead preferring to keep close to the door and leave as quickly as possible, and that bizarre reaction seemed to give Scat-Hack amusement. I asked, and once again I was given cryptic messages back. She is just a bit shy. Worry not, she will be honest when she feels ready. Maya. She is a fool, but there's a chance she can improve from that point. Scat-Hack. Yep, I think I will just give up the guessing game before I lose my mind. Nonetheless, the situation at the homefront was quite calm beyond this kind of drama. The kingdom had finally finished the last steps of the centralization effort, with many autonomous cities within the country now firmly submitted to the capital's will. With submission came help and reform. Builders were dispatched to expand infrastructures in towns, cities, and even small villages. A survey on all major roads was called to provide better paths through the entirety of the nation, and churches were being built in new places. Britannia had finally cemented its domain within the British Isles, its gaze now aimed elsewhere as it was now able to resume a job left unfinished. Gallia had yet to be fully unified, with the south still being held by the Visigoths. I had thought of going after the dangerous tribal kingdom as soon as possible, but I decided to wait to have a strong enough fleet to cover the Atlantic flank from any incursions from the Spanish ports before going for it. And when the newly created country asked for help due to some border conflicts escalating in its southern border and the Alemanni becoming more hostile by the day, I saw fit to organize a united front to crush the Visigoths and the Alemanni at once. Clovis was interested when he was invited in this alliance, even so when I brought him a non-negligible slice of land that would further bolster his kingdom's standing but also remove a threat from his borders. Valia had finished going through the last necessary efforts to form a professional army, but mentioned how a prolonged war would be detrimental in the long run. So, the plan for this campaign was simple: free southern Gallia and provide the lands owned by modern-day Switzerland and the French Comte to the Franks. The decision would permanently seal Gallia's issues in the east, minus Odoacer's kingdom, and fix their focus on a border that was easier to defend. Yes, we were just going to push the Visigoths beyond modern-day Spain's borders and not beyond that. Blockades would do the rest by the time the land objectives we had set to capture were under our control. What really made this effort easy to look at was the large majority of citizens in these regions being Chalcedonian Christians. The Visigoths had espoused Arianism, which was seen as one of the heretic alterations of the more common Chalcedonian view. And yes, the version of Christianity back home was not Chalcedonian but Britannian, but no council had seen fit to define it as a heretic twist to the religion, so for now we had no trouble in that regard. With the fleet fully modernized and packing enough ships to be a formidable fleet, and the soldiers being sharply trained and provided with better equipment through new technologies to improve the light armor, artillery being able to now pack greater explosives with greater precision, and we were experimenting with some air balloon technology. Nothing that we could use yet, and it would take about a year or so to get something done would just work the way I wanted. Both for civilian purposes and war-related reasons. This improvement even applied new rifles in the form of a step back from my previous effort. If I wasn't going to get my Garand-wielding army, then I preferred to rely on something that I knew would still make the difference. In this case, the Dre's needle gun, or an altered version of it. The rifle was a downgrade compared to the ideal gun I had in mind, but it did serve its purpose, and after organizing who was going to hold it within each team within the army I dispatched, I ultimately created it as a means to introduce sharpshooter within warfare itself. Individuals that had sharp eyes and could see from afar and that knew how to handle the rifle with dedication, care, and appropriate gestures. Training proved that the groups of sharpshooter were going to be devastating, and so I was quite relieved when I was given confirmation of this during the month-long campaign. Where the Franks had an easy time shattering the Alemanni, with none of the German tribes beyond the Rhine being interested in aiding the smaller country, the small Britannian contingent sent to support the Gallian armies was immediately seen as a valuable unit. Despite early plans suggesting that it would take long before we reached the modern-day Franco-Spanish border, a combination of rapid devastating assaults and encirclements led to a very odd situation 2 weeks into that war. Most of the Visigoths' troops had been annihilated in that swift attack, the border was wide open and ready to be crossed, and Valia was. Can we get more? Despite previous unease at proceeding further than the established line of demarcation, I could tell the success had given her confidence to go beyond early plans. And since I wasn't up to disappointing my newest ally but also mind the fact going too deep would just draw too much attention and stretch the lines of logistics, I accepted but limited the advance to end taking the regions of Catalonia, Aragon, Navarra, and the Basque area. Going any further was discouraged, with the point of those regions being priority due to their highly defensive terrain, which would give a bigger springboard in case of a new war with them. Much to my relief, Valia accepted the points I had raised, allowing me to ultimately secure a foothold in Spain. What wasn't exactly known at the time was that I got the chance to instigate a fourth ally into moving against the Visigoths. I was no expert in Iberian history within this context due to how little was known about this time period. There was a large understanding of what happened 3 decades ago when the Suevian king Ricaire managed to oust the Visigoths from most of the Iberian territory. Sadly, this circumstance faltered when the war took Ricaire out of the picture and allowed for a comeback from the Visigoths. After a few tentative letters exchanged with the current ruler of the Suebi in Bracara, I managed to secure a deal with the young prince in charge of the state affair. Prince Ricaire the Young, named after his grandfather, was a revanchist youngster. He saw the war situation as an opportunity to jump the winning wagon, and, when I approached him with the ambition of conquering the rest of the region under his banner, the boy jumped at the occasion. It didn't matter how prepared his troops were, he would have had an easy path to glory, yet I was surprised to learn that some of the armies were being dispatched in a similar way as Britannian troops moved. It was at this point that I learned that I got some admirers in Europe that would have made for good allies in my plans. Not too many, but enough to present some ideas for future expansion. Beyond that point, the rest of Iberia was fully conquered and the war itself ceased as the Visigoths were kicked out of Europe and exiled in their North African provinces. By the end of the month-limited campaign, a meeting between kings was called and I was forced to finally leave Londinium to take part in this. Tolosa, modern-day Toulouse, was picked as the place of reunion where 4 kings would meet and formalize the spoils of war gained through this campaign. Clovis didn't mind the 4th invite, Valia was less pleased by it, but nonetheless relieved to know that the threat created by the mere existence of the Visigoths was now gone. It was going to be a monumental event nonetheless. 4 kings known to be pro-Rome were finally going to meet in a single place and finally speak with one another as friends and allies. An opportunity many would see as dangerous or good depending on their standing on what should be done of the memory of the old Roman Empire. But as the meeting's date drew close, I just could feel that things were only to get complicated, as many would never accept this alliance to last for long. Especially a certain ruler in modern-day Italy that would prefer for the dream of Rome to be crushed forever. Or maybe something else. As unaware to all 4 of us, an uninvited guest would soon prepare to depart for that meeting, bearing with him a much familiar flag to define his loyalty and holding a letter with an even more important seal to it. A man of God and faith had made a decision, and that decision was going to be a game-changer for the next few years in Europe.